Welcome to Season 2 of the Inconvenient Minority Podcast. I'm your host, Kenny Shu. We're talking about race, identity, and culture and the fight against wokeness and DEI. This is part 2 of a 2-episode long series on how we beat UNC's DEI programs in their medical school. As you guys know, I run an organization called Color Us United. And we're a nonprofit that advocates for a race-blind society, meaning that we are obviously opposed to a lot of the critical race theory and DEI programs going on in our country today. One of the key places where it's occurring is the field of medicine, where people trust their doctors to be the best qualified and most qualified. That means that people do not want doctors of a certain race. They just want the highest quality doctor. So before I get to my guest today, Nancy Andersen, I want to just brief you guys a little bit, and I want to reiterate a little bit about where we're picking up from this campaign. In October 2020, the University of North Carolina's medical school released a document called the Task Force to Integrate Social Justice into its curriculum. This task force came up with 84 different DEI recommendations that they asked the medical school to do. These recommendations included mandatory unconscious bias trainings, racial preferences in admissions, so racially selecting doctors by race instead of merit, mandatory political statements that doctors and faculty and students had to sign in order to get into their residencies, fellowships, and trainings, and also to get into the university and to get into the medical school. These are things that are antithetical to the perspective of a high-quality doctor. And the reason why Color Us United, my nonprofit, chose to take on UNC Medical School is because we understand that in a critical profession like medicine, especially in the higher upper-tier medicine like surgery, radiology, those kinds of things, you cannot compromise quality. You cannot compromise the competency of a doctor. And I think Americans inherently and universally understand this. So this is why I'm super proud to bring in a UNC former general surgery resident, Nancy Andersen, MD. So Nancy graduated from UNC's general surgery department. She personally knows a ton of UNC doctors. She is in a position to speak out in a way that a lot of UNC doctors are not. So I'm really grateful to have Nancy Andersen come and talk with me today on the Inconvenient Minority Podcast about why we should be tackling DEI in the medical schools and our campaign and its eventual success. So Nancy, it's good to see you.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Nancy, first of all, why don't you give a little bit of background about, your experience in the general surgery department of UNC Medical School while you were still training?
Sure. So I trained in general surgery at UNC between the years of 2003 and 2010. It was a 7-year residency because I did 2 years of bench research in the middle of it. Mm-hmm. So I was there for quite a while. It was my first choice residency program. It was a top general surgery residency program. You may not hear this necessarily, but at the time, UNC surgery residents graduated with some of the highest board passing rates in the country, higher even than, say, Duke, Michigan, Harvard, some of the Ivy Leagues. It was such a well-rounded program in terms of the balance of both academic, didactic lectures and experience as well as practical experience. And you had a lot of responsibility. Mm-hmm. There were times when I was a chief resident, I had services of 50 to 55 severely ill patients that you're taking care of. And so, it was a very demanding program, a very fair program. And I really got along well with my colleagues and coworkers and looked up to the mentors that were there at the time.
Wow.
Sorry.
So you said something very interesting. You said this program competed with like the Harvard, Stanfords of the world in terms of medical school, in terms of their surgery program.
I would say for general surgery, in a lot of aspects, it was better than the Harvards or Stanfords. One of the reasons for that is because it didn't have a lot of fellows in terms of subspecialists training in those specific areas. So, for example, at the time, the pediatric surgery department was very large. They had several nationally renowned pediatric surgeons, but no fellow. So as a senior resident, you got to do all of those big cases that normally a fellow at a Harvard or a Stanford got to do. So the general surgery residents got a lot of practical experience on very important and advanced cases because of the nature of the way UNC was set up. And I think that helped lead to, high board passing rates and results because we had that hands-on experience. But we also had excellent mentors and professors, surgeons that really cared about our education and wanted to make sure we did the right thing.
And what was the culture like when you were training for general surgery? I guess, we have a stereotype in the media of like a general surgery clinic being extremely cutthroat. Like one person would graduate over, like 12 different people. And it's just obvious. It's almost like a brutalistic version of a meritocracy. But at least were those values in place? And how would you describe it?
I would describe it as tough but collegial. There was a respect there. I certainly had respect for my mentors. There are a lot of sleepless nights, a ton of responsibility. So, the fact that they're able to maintain a level of cool in that, I highly respect that and can understand why, some surgeons might be a little bit brusque or blunt with people just by the nature of their jobs. But surgery used to be very much that way in terms of a pyramidal system. And, at the time when I trained there, one of my greatest mentors and the chairman of surgery came from a program where he was basically the last one left after 6 years. Every year they get rid of some people. And so there was a generation of surgeons out there, not so much anymore, that did go through that program. But at UNC, they didn't hold it against us as residents that it was no longer that way. They just cared that, we were trained in the best way possible and the best techniques possible to deliver the best care possible. And personally, as a female, I didn't feel like I was treated any differently than males there. And I respect male surgeons as much as female surgeons. I wasn't looking for a particularly female-heavy program. I just wanted a program that gave me the best education possible, and I thought that was UNC.
How many hours would you say you're in the hospital a week?
General surgery residency is all inpatient, basically.
Okay.
It's not like other residencies like pediatrics where you spend 6 or 7 months out of the year just going to clinic in a kind of 8 to 5 setting. It's all inpatient. So you're constantly rounding on inpatient services and hospitalized patients. And those hours can
What does
vary.
That mean to be inpatient?
The patients are hospitalized.
Okay.
So you might go to a clinic and help out in attending at that clinic and see outpatient patients that day. But before you do that clinic, you still have responsibilities for your own service. So for example, if you're rotating through the GI surgery service, you would go in at say 5:30, 6 in the morning with your team, round on the number of patients that are hospitalized in that service, which can include ICU patients, step-down patients, floor patients. And then if you're assigned to clinic that day, you go to see the outpatient GI surgery patients in the clinic. And then you, after the clinic is over, go back and check on your inpatient patients for that day and go home and with your pager, or if you're a junior resident, stay in the hospital and take care of it. So you're never truly just doing a pure outpatient rotation. You're always taking care of some of the sickest of the sick patients in the hospital.
And how many hours would you say you would do that a week?
Well, I was actually the starting class on the whole 80-hour work week thing experiment, which was interesting. So it was still at the time when I went through, they were trying to adapt to the 80-hour work week, but it was a difficult adaptation to make. And
is that shorter than what was before? Okay,
no, they were limiting you to 80 hours. Yeah. And that was really hard because you'd have to hand things off if you were forced to go home and communicate. You might have done a surgery on the patient overnight that came in overnight, but then you'd have to hand off what happened to the person coming in the next day so that you could make your hours. And, it was definitely took some years to adjust to that system. So I would say anywhere between, a good week, a short week for me, it was 70 hours, maybe a lucky week, if you want to say, but more reasonably 90 to 100.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Before the 8-hour work week thing, it was easily 110 for those residents that had to go through that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a tough but collegial environment.
It's a physical, tough, but collegial, we're all in it together kind of environment. Like we understand there's a certain understanding because you understand how hard it is to do the job, and other people understand on your side how hard it is to do the job. So there's, a team aspect to it in a sense. It's a very unique experience. Not that many people experience it.
So you were one of the first writers and commentators to really criticize the UNC Medical School's DEI program. I think I'm skipping a few lines. Obviously, you completed that general surgery program, but you got married, and you have now become like a sort of commentator on these issues, and you also are no longer working in the surgery clinic. Right. So you have that luxury, you have that freedom, and you decided that when UNC came up with their task force to integrate social justice and some of their DEI programs, you decided that this was something that you needed to write about. What motivated you for that?
Well, I saw the destruction of an institution that was important to me, and it was the basis of my surgical education, and I hate to see it destroyed without saying something about that. Other groups also inspired me. Your group, obviously, when you brought Dr. Zama, and I came and listened to him, and it was very inspiring and nice to know that other people are out there that are very concerned about this.
Yeah.
The groups like Do No Harm, when Dr. Goldfarb wrote his op-ed for the Wall Street Journal. My husband's also in the medical profession, an orthopedic surgeon, and he pointed it out to me. And this is like the hill to die on. I mean, do we want to watch our medical institutions collapse under the weight of DEI ideology, or do we want to fight for the excellence in medicine that we all deserve? So I am in a position where I can fight, and there are physicians I know who would, but are too scared of the repercussions. And so I speak for them too.
Can you talk to me about, based on the conversations that you've had with UNC doctors who you still remain in contact with, what has there been any shift from the culture that you described?
From the culture of merit or from the culture of DEI? Which one? I've been through a couple cultures. I'm sorry.
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would say when I was there was no emphasis. We didn't have any of these DEI trainings. DEI wasn't a term. I didn't know about it.
Yeah.
We treated each other, again, like I said, you could be male, female, black, white, Asian, Indian. It didn't matter. What mattered was, can you do the duties needed to keep these people alive and healthy? That's what you cared about. Can you perform in the surgery when patients are literally bleeding and you need to control the bleeding so that they don't die? Are you capable of doing that? Can you get the central line in? Can you evaluate the patient? Can you diagnose them appropriately in the emergency room? Can you decide and prioritize what patients need to be brought to the operating room first? That type of thing is what people were judged by,
right,
and what they should be judged by. Grand rounds and lectures and those things were focused on, diagnosis and treatment and outcomes and very scientific, subjects, that bore the everyday person, but are important there. Surgical technique, that type of thing. Occasionally the historical lecture of interest. But now when I'm seeing, when I peruse, and because everything's, pretty much online, and when I peruse the online grand rounds or when I talk to people in the system, there's a much less of an emphasis on academics and more of an emphasis on ideology and what we all look like, and making sure providing equitable care, which has its own ramifications, and making sure no one feels bad and no one experiences microaggressions, which was never a term when I was there.
Yeah.
And the stuff which, you would deal with as an individual anyway, in your own way. And now it's a very controlling atmosphere. And when I talk to people who are still there or who are there, physicians, a lot of them basically describe it as a feeling of being numb to this. Like they're been so indoctrinated with the constant, we have to recognize our systemic racism, and we have to recognize our implicit and internal biases, and the privileges that some of us experience because of our color and some of us don't have because of our color. They basically tune out. Like they're sitting there tuned out, thinking about their next case or their patient or their clinic list that day, and they've just become numb to it and it just washes over them. And it's a very sad thing.
Do you think it's compromising the quality of the program?
Yes. Yeah, I do. Because, for example, and you wrote about this, Kenny, and did an excellent job conveying the message. In January, there was a national meeting of the Society of Thoracic Surgeons, STS. And it wasn't even in North Carolina. I think it was somewhere out west. I'm not sure. The outgoing president of the Society of Thoracic Surgeons, an older gentleman named Dr. Calhoun, gave an address as the exiting president. And the slides I saw involved, he talked about, wanting to have diversity and be including people, but he also talked about how he wanted to do that through merit. And he criticized affirmative action policies in medicine and specifically in surgery, which I think is his right to do. Yeah. And as someone with decades of experience and a president of the Society of Thoracic Surgeons, he's earned the right to do that. And
by the way, that's the society that really grades surgery clinics for how good they do to patients. So you need this kind of society.
Yeah. And it's cardiovascular. It's thoracic surgeons, chest surgeons are kind of known as, pretty intense. Like that's kind of the most intense subspecialty for surgery. I mean, you're literally operating on the heart. So
yeah. So you said merit is important in heart surgery.
Right. And he kind of criticized affirmative action, which is his personal right to do so. And you can agree or not agree. No one's saying you have to agree. You can get up and leave. It's a voluntary lecture. But there was a significant amount of backlash apparently on social media. Doctors from across the country calling him racist, calling him privileged for saying that, decrying it. And the woke mob came after this event, and the Society of Thoracic Surgeons apologized for this. So, but what's interesting is I obtained, which I gave to you, an internal email at UNC where the vice dean of DEI for surgery, who's a vascular surgeon at UNC, sent out an email signed by himself and the new chair, who's not there neither of these people I know personally, they were not there when I was there, Dr. Greenberg, sent an email out to the entire general surgery internal listserv, talking about how hurtful this talk was and how it damaged their efforts to recruit based on diversity or some such thing. Literally used the word harmful. And not only that, but went beyond and said, we are going to take a portion of our conference this week, one of our educational conferences this week, to talk about our feelings regarding this. Yeah. And I saw that email and I just, my jaw drops to the floor. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, why can't a surgeon with decades of experience have an opinion about a policy that you can agree or disagree with? It didn't even occur at UNC. This wasn't even UNC didn't even host this event. Yeah. And hundreds of miles away, some surgeon at UNC who has decided that he knows more about, political policies than everyone else is going to email the entire surgery department. One, tell them how to feel about it. Two, guilt people who might have actually agreed with this surgeon, and disagree with the idea of affirmative action, which is their right to do. Right. And then have to interrupt an educational conference to have a meeting. What are they going to talk about? Yeah. If this offends you, my issue, Kenny, is thinking from having trained there, if this is the type of thing that's going to ruin your day, hearing that this physician, this Dr. Calhoun, has an opinion about affirmative action and may not jive with yours, if that's going to ruin your day and distract you to the point where you need counseling about it, what are you going to do when you nick the femoral artery and the patient's bleeding? Like, gosh. You know what I mean? Like, if that's going to upset you, what's going to happen in the OR when it's time to raise your game and you got to identify the bleeder and the trauma patient? before they die.
You're going to run to your DEI officer.
Right. Like you're going to call your DEI officer on the phone and cry
oh
about
my gosh, my patient's artery is bleeding. It's my fault. I don't know what to do.
I mean, if you're
it's
that
not your
sensitive.
fault. It's society's fault. It's actually white supremacy's fault. That's what he'll say while the patient is like on the desk, just blood gouging out of his pores.
It's just such a distraction. And no one's saying you have to agree with the guy. You can be all for affirmative action. I don't care. But I mean, the fact that they have to have a meeting and you have to think a certain way. And of course, I mean, you can, okay, so say if I were still there, this is why I would be fired if I were still there, because I would write an email back that says, this is none of your business. We're old enough now and mature enough now to make our own decisions about whether or not this guy gave a good talk or not. Mm-hmm. We don't need to have a meeting about it. And who do you think you are telling me how to feel about it? This has nothing to do with my day-to-day education. Mm-hmm. It didn't occur at UNC. This guy is an employee of UNC. And it's a totally subjective opinion as to whether he gave a good lecture or not, and whether you agree with his opinions or not. And I would not go to the M&M, and then I would be labeled a racist or exclusionary or something.
M&M means morbidities and mortalities.
And I'm starting to get into
that's like the surgery's like big conference about how to improve their practice. Go ahead.
How to improve outcomes, and you talk about specific morbidities that your team might have experienced and why they happen. So yeah, when I talk fast, some of the doctor speak comes out. So I apologize for that. And I wouldn't go. And then I would be labeled because I was the one person who would choose not to go to that event. You see what I mean? It's like the Stalin last person clapping. Like you don't want to be, you want to be the last person cheering Stalin on, right? Yeah. So you're not sent to the gulag. The same thing. So if you don't go to this conference that they're having, then it labels you as, without a good excuse, then it labels you as not being on the DEI train, and you become the outsider, and you become labeled and at risk of being, put up to the woke mob. And that's what's really irritating and annoying about it. And I think it needs to be called out. And I thought you did an excellent job with that Federalist article, Kenny, in analyzing that email and exactly asking the question, what are we doing here? This is what DEI means. This is the practical example of what having an infusion of DEI in the health system means. It means emails and like this. It means a pretension of these doctors outside of their expertise in terms of having political opinions and forcing it on everyone else because it's the fad of the day, and it's unacceptable.
I just think that for surgery, you mentioned already that they are kind of a brusque personality. Mm-hmm. Like they're going to tell it to you straight, right? But if the emphasis is now on inclusion and making sure everyone feels comfortable, that's just really not how surgeons operate. I mean, okay, like, I don't actually, I want to qualify that by saying I think surgeons are really great people.
Right.
A lot of them are.
No, I mean, you need a balance in everything, right? Like
But I think there's the pendulum is kind of swung with the DEI sphere to where they're sort of overemphasizing, your little collegiality and the way that you talk to people and not microaggress, and less underemphasizing actually treating the patient.
Right. Like that's what I would say is at least when I was training in surgery, microaggressions are understandable. Like you're operating on very little sleep. You have significant responsibilities. Like literally, I would literally go into work and be like, okay, what are the things I need to do to keep from, I mean, this is going to sound ugly, but to keep from killing someone today, like to what am I going to say to my interns? What are my priorities going to be so that everyone, gets through the day with the appropriate care and gets their studies done and gets their procedures done safely and all of this stuff, because we're dealing with very sick people who have multiple medical issues. And how are we going to make this all function and work in as efficient and healthy a way as possible? That's the type of thing that I'm thinking about, and those are my priorities. So, and that's the type of thing my friends were thinking about, my mentors are thinking about. So if they're a little brusque, which I guess today would be identified as a microaggression, I don't know. Yeah. But if they're a little short with me, or they say, no, Nancy, your idea is stupid, I didn't take it because I'm like a woman or because they're not being respectful. I mean, it's because we have a demanding job and they're going to use the fewest words possible, and it's totally okay. You gotta have a little bit of a shield there where you don't take everything so personally. And I mean, you don't want to have it to the point where you can't function because they're totally demeaning or whatever. But that wasn't the case. I mean, people were respectful, and if there was a spat, if there was something, you handled it and moved on.
It's like the way pilots talk. When pilots talk, they're very concise. Everything is just in order. This, that. You try to say things as few words as possible. In high stress professions, that's just the way people talk. I have a question for you though. So as you know, Colorists United, we ran, which I'm president of, we ran a campaign to stop the DEI practices in the med school. And in response, a group of like 170 UNC faculty kind of penned a letter saying, we defend diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you know who made up the largest percentage of those faculty? UNC School of Medicine professors.
There were a lot of doctors on that.
A lot of doctors.
I don't know that they were surgeons. There might have been different.
Probably not surgeons.
I mean, there have been studies done where, political thoughts are kind of related to the subspecialty profession, which is interesting. But yeah, I don't know.
Why would, could you get into a little bit about why would so many, I think 50% of those faculty who signed that document were School of Medicine faculty.
Was this also the anti-tenure letter, or was it just DEI?
It was anti-tenure, DEI.
There were a couple things with it, right?
The whole gist of it was to protect the DEI system.
Well, I think some of them are genuinely ideologues and genuinely believe in this stuff. And if they have social media accounts and you go to some of their Twitter accounts, they're going to say they're anti-racist allies and all of that. There's certainly a huge section of medicine that has been indoctrinated in that stuff and genuinely believe it. I mean, we have plenty of doctors who are on various DEI committees at UNC who are vice chairs of DEI. We have the surgeon himself, the vice dean of surgery DEI, sending out an email, judging this surgeon who is more senior and superior in experience to him without a second thought. So we do have those physicians in all specialties who have bought into the full DEI ideology. And then I think there's a subset of physicians who don't really understand what it is. They get like the group email from their buddies or whatever. Someone sends the chain email. It's like, hey, the tyrants in government want to prevent UNC from giving tenure. This isn't fair. If you want tenure and you disagree with these tyrants, then sign this email chain. So they sign it, because they just see it as a very superficial thing. Like, hey, I worked for tenure. I want to get tenure. Like, I don't agree that the legislature should have a say in that. So I'm going to sign this. It's kind of that simple. And maybe on this particular letter, for some reason, there were a couple physicians that have a lot of physician friends and the email list happened to hit the medical school. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
And maybe because the medical school is a little bit separate from so much of the ridiculousness in academia as it is, like they don't see it as often or what. But yeah, I was surprised. I saw that when I was scrolling through that too, and I was kind of surprised, but it is what it is.
Well, one thing that we were able to do was we were able to alert the public and the state legislature and the UNC Board of Trustees, some of whom were sympathetic to us. We were able to alert them about how DEI is imposing harmful policies and consequences on their students and faculty. And if you want to know more, that's part 1 of this podcast series. So I would just scroll back to that. This is more focused on our campaign, the effort, and Nancy's own experience. But Nancy, after Fox News reported that UNC Med School renounced its own DEI framework as a result of our campaign, which they keep saying.
It's an interesting statement they made.
They keep saying, first of all, they don't deny it. But second of all, they keep saying that this task force had been disbanded for like 3 years now. So they're just trying to give me a little
it's a little wordsmithing there.
A little wordsmith. They're just trying to prick me a little bit by saying,
needle you.
This guy didn't really do anything. This Colorist United group didn't really do anything.
This was already,
even though like as late as November 2022, they sent a document to their accreditor, the AAMC, Association for Medical Colleges, basically saying, we complied with 82 of your 89 DEI recommendations. We're so pro this DEI stuff. And now suddenly they're like, we're not pro this DEI stuff, but also we were never pro this DEI stuff. I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, they're talking technicalities and stuff that isn't really the truth.
Yeah, but the point of what I was saying was after Fox News reported that UNC renounced its DEI framework, I got this tweet from this doctor, basically Jamie Key is her name, from the University of Kentucky, saying, Kenny Xu can't wait to hear more about how he feels about removing years of progress for underrepresented minority students. And she tagged UNC's accreditor, AAMC.
So condescending. Well, they got to hold each other accountable like the Stasi's officers they are. So that's why she tagged the AAMC.
Right. So there's a lot of like mind guard and there's a lot of solidarity around DEI that's not really based in reason. But can you explain to the audience why DEI is not progress for underrepresented minority students?
Well, DEI is a thinly veiled political movement. It's basically what it is. A way to grab power and to have control over other people and their thoughts. And while at the same time boosting your own virtue in the world, saying you're doing something for, for public value and aren't you a great person without having to actually do anything, in my mind, practical, other than shout other people down and rehearse NPR talking points. Maybe that's a little blunt, but that's, what I think. A lot of these policies are actually hurtful to minority physicians. And it's something, again, that, you were brilliant in bringing Dr. Zama on. And I think he does an excellent job of exposing the backlash that this anti-meritocratic DEI, because DEI is essentially saying merit isn't as important as minority representation, right?
And inclusion.
Right, and inclusion. So, and it de-emphasizes objective test scores and it says things are racist and all of that stuff and these holistic admissions, basically choosing people that go along with the ideology, with the idea of equity in medicine, which, we can get into at some point if you want, but with the agenda that the DEI propagandists want to continue. And so they're self-selecting their own activists in DEI. And the problem is, as Dr. Zama points out, is that then you lose public trust because the public expects in people like their airline pilots, their bridge builders, their surgeons, their doctors, that it's going to be the people who have achieved the most and who show the most promise for that profession that are going to be treating them or building their bridges or doing their surgeries. And so if the public starts learning that, oh, wait, they're not choosing people based on that, they're choosing people based on race, it causes a backlash on the people who earned that position, who might be of that minority race, because then the public thinks that person, the Dr. Zamas of the world, were chosen purely because of their race, not because of what they've achieved, and don't necessarily want to go see those doctors.
Right.
And I'm seeing it as, I've written about this a little bit in some of the comments as I follow social media, and it scares me because I don't like hearing it. The public is saying, I am never going to see a Black doctor. I am never going to see that type of, I'm only going to see a white or an Asian doctor because if they're in there, then they must really be something special because they're not chosen based on their race. And I hate hearing that because it shouldn't be that way. And what these DEI activists, like this woman who responded to you with such a banal comment, is doing is actually creating racism by telling the public we're choosing people based on inclusion criteria instead of achievement criteria.
Yeah. And so I responded to this woman. I said, what progress has DEI made for med schools, ma'am? There's a lower percentage of Black male doctors now than in 1970. That is with DEI and affirmative action policies. You know why? Because you can accept all of the Black doctors that you want. If they don't graduate, it's not helping. It's not helping them. It's not helping them, and it's not helping the world. And then I said, the problem is the K-12 education system and the Black family. Common sense knows this. Not just my talking points, Dr. Zama's talking points too. Everybody knows why Black students are not achieving at the level of white students right now. It's because the K-12 education system sucks in America, and it's worst in the most liberal cities like Baltimore and Chicago and Los Angeles. Everybody knows this. At least everybody who's willing to be honest with themselves knows this.
Right.
So, and then here's how she responded. She responded to me saying, I wish you would gather in a room with those marginalized in medical school and residency programs who are past K-12 and still being limited by biases they have no control over.
Oh, please.
I want you to tell them to their faces that they're less caliber and not worth supporting.
What?
Yeah. So she believes that I am a racist and a bigot,
well, of course,
because I'm not willing to lower standards
right.
for minorities.
It looks like her picture there. She's white.
Yeah.
Is she maybe white?
Yeah. She's
well,
white.
she should put the quit in equity and quit and give her position to a marginalized person.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if that's what she cares about, then why is she taking up space for someone who's marginalized and could be in her position? Shame on her.
Yeah. Shame on you.
That's
shame
what I say.
You.
I mean, again, we can all have differing opinions, but what I feel that what she's doing is actually harmful and condescending. And I wouldn't want a man to say that to me as a female. You know, if you were to substitute instead of race, if you were to substitute that for gender, and if that woman was actually, say, a male, like James, and he was saying, aren't you in the room with women, and don't you want, why don't you support women? They should have lower, blah, 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 because of all of the years of systemic sexism and everything. I would be really mad. I would find that very condescending as a female. So,
and this is how this proves your point, which is DEI is about power and control. It's not truly about serving underrepresented minority students. In fact, this doctor, is using the political cachet of underrepresented minority students, particularly Black students, to serve her own agenda. This is why we need DEI. This is why I need the DEI officer promotion, which, by the way, is now a promotion at UNC Medical School. You can get extra money for serving DEI ends.
Yes.
So this is why she wants to use it for her own ends, and she wants to use the faces of Black students and Hispanic students to justify her own advancement. That's the ironic part about all of this DEI stuff.
Well, that, and it's also, you can be a lazy thinker. I would call her a lazy thinker. I'm sorry. But, to be blunt, it's very lazy to just blame everything on systemic racism, to blame everything on implicit bias that you can't actually quantify. And by the way, is deeply problematic. Even the own Harvard implicit association test authors say that their methods were somewhat flawed. So, but you never hear about that, right? Like this Dr. Key, she doesn't talk about that. She doesn't bring up those issues. She just puts everything again and, they're marginalized. Like all the key words, all the code words are here in her tweet. Marginalized, biases, no control, less caliber, all of these kind of vague, generic, lazy thinking terms that don't actually mean anything and have no quantifiable evidence behind it.
Yeah.
So I just see it as, I see DEI, insofar as it's based on critical race theory and those other ideologies, and systemic racism, white privilege, is a very lazy way to think, not too deeply about these issues. Yeah,
it's a lazy way of thinking, and it doesn't get to the root causes of things. People will tell me all the time, well, what are you going to do about the Black mortality rate and why it's so much higher for Black women? I'm like, do you know why it's so much higher? They're like, because of racism? I'm like, no, it's not because of racism. It's because Black women have higher preterm pregnancy lengths that are caused by shorter gestational lengths in their pregnancy term, which are caused by a mix of genetics and life stressors, behavior, obesity, diabetes, husband not in the home, lots of these stressors. Are some of these problems, real issues in our country? Yeah. Is it the job of the medical school to treat these problems? No. These are political problems. These are not medical problems.
Yeah. Well, and plus, yeah, I mean, even what she's saying, I mean, look at what she's saying. She's saying something like they have no control over. So she's telling people who are quote unquote marginalized, however you want to define that they have no control. They have no power in their lives, that they have to listen to people like her. I mean, I feel like that in itself is racist. People absolutely can have power over their own lives. They can make changes in their diet. They can make changes, in their exercise habits. They can make changes in their schooling if they want, read more, spend less time on TV, whatever. You have the power to do these things. Mm-hmm. For her to say that these quote unquote marginalized communities have no power is one, false, two, very condescending. I don't agree with her at all.
Right.
Sorry.
You don't have to be sorry. I don't agree with her, and I'm not sorry.
Yeah.
But it also
because
sorry. She says, "I wish you would gather in a room with those marginalized in medical school and residency programs and are still being limited by biases they have no control over." What biases?
Yeah.
Like, where? Point me the evidence that these white doctors are so biased against these black people. Are they not admitting these black patients? Well, no, they're admitting them, but they just don't understand them.
Yeah.
What do you mean they don't understand them? How are you supposed to understand a kidney failure?
Yeah.
Is a black kidney failure different from a white kidney failure?
Yeah.
No, it's not. But they have to make up something. It's like unconscious. Unconsciously, they don't like black people. Unconsciously,
you have to make it up.
They have biases against these people. No. And by the way, you know how to make it biases. Do you know how to stem biases in people? By proving yourself based on merit. Mm-hmm. By being a meritorious individual. There was real racial segregation in the United States, and people didn't allow black football players onto football teams. And then, they saw how these black football players were performing. They were like, we need black football players. We need some of these football players. They really proved themselves on the basis of merit. I'm not saying there is no racism in society. I'm saying that right now the system is actually structured to bring underqualified minorities into the profession, which is only going to make whatever biases that you're saying worse.
Right. You're going to bring in people who aren't capable because they're basing the acceptance on other factors rather than merit or achievement or objective grades. And then they can't perform at a level of maybe some of the peers. And what ends up happening is those peers start resenting the people brought in, because the other people have to make up the difference in the work and the effort and the hours and all that stuff to make sure that things are covered. And so it creates an atmosphere of resentment and a defeatist for those who are brought in, who are told one thing, that we believe in you and you can do this job, when they actually aren't qualified. And so they become devastated and, have to deal with those issues. So this line of thinking to me is deeply problematic and antithetical to bringing, excellent medical care to people.
Tell me what you think are the next steps that we should take to make medical schools a more meritorious, excellent place that produces better quality doctors.
I think all DEI departments should be abolished in public institutions. I mean, if a private institution or private practice wants to market and put in the sweat equity in their own funds and their own efforts and market their practice and compete in the marketplace based on a DEI ideology or, whatever they want to call it, go for it. They can do it. But in terms of usurping our public tax dollars for this, if we really want to have public institutions that are successful, we need to abolish the DEI. It's just waste at this point. Right. We see it with this task force report, right? They didn't take any of the recommendations. Well, okay, so we had a huge group of people who are paid, a couple $100,000 each, maybe, or whatever, full-time employees' jobs whose sole job is to produce a report that would improve medicine from a DEI standpoint, and they can't even use it. and we're still paying these people. I mean, I don't understand it. Like, then why do we have this department? Like, what are we doing if we can't even implement the policies that these quote unquote experts came up with? Hello, kind of wasteful. So I don't think these ideologies, and again, like I said before, DEI is a thinly veiled political movement anyway, which doesn't have a place in public institutions. So, the step would be to get our legislatures and to get our leaders to recognize the DEI bureaucracy is a farce, and to dismantle these bureaucracies and get rid of these DEI apparatchiks that are, basically doing a thought control experiment on their coworkers through these implicit bias trainings and whatever else. In order to get there, we need to keep exposing it and showing people. I think a lot of people in the everyday communities they hear diversity, they hear inclusion. It sounds great. Americans are for that stuff. They're not, but they don't really understand what it means in practicality, and what these bureaucrats and some of these ideologue doctors are doing. And so continuing to expose things like the aspect of the task report that said something like pedagogy in the lecture format.
Oh, yeah. Black people can't sit through lectures.
Yeah, it said in its academic world salad something like pedagogical structures in the lecture format do a disservice to underrepresented minorities. So a lot of big 3-syllable, 4-syllable words to basically say, we don't think minorities can sit through lectures. So, which is so racist and demeaning and just ridiculous. And these are what the quote unquote 6-figure experts are coming up with. And so communicating that to the public, showing that excerpt like you did on your Twitter feed and saying, this is what they're recommending. This is what DEI is. It's a total pretentious, condescending word salad of meaningless terms that are actually insulting. And what I loved was, I can't remember which one of the Twitter feeds retweeted it, and a bunch of minorities started chiming in.
Oh yeah, I think Free Black Thought.
Yeah, Free Black. Yeah.
Yeah.
And these minorities were just so offended, as they should be. And it was great to read, because people need to see that this is not, that these words, diversity and inclusion, do not mean what they think they mean. And so, organizations like yours, Do No Harm, organizations that I work with, like No Left Turn in Education and Ed First Alliance, continue to do the work to expose what this stuff actually means in practical everyday life, and how ridiculous and racist it is. And then hopefully we can get more doctors to speak out, and in numbers, if they fire all the good doctors because they have different opinions, the whole system will collapse. So at some point, I'm hoping enough doctors are willing to speak out and to brave the woke mob, that, this will just be, the DEI will be exposed for the fraud that it is, and will be untenable to continue,
Thank you. Well, that's truly what I believe in too. There is absolutely no reason why UNC should have a DEI department, especially since it has now renounced the task force that formed the basis of DEI for their med school. No reason. DEI should not be put in the incentive structure. DEI should not be used as a condition of promotion. DEI should not be considered a genuinely helpful way to help minorities, because it is not. It is a way for people who support DEI to abuse and control other people who don't. At the very least, and it doesn't help underrepresented minority students. It needs to end. It hurts the surgery profession. It hurts the medical profession. It leads to lower quality doctors. And its acronym spells DIE.
Yeah, that's the boomer interpretation. Yeah, it does. Yeah, that is kind of funny. DIE. Yeah.
All right, Nancy. Anything else? Thank you so much for
thank you for being patient with me and letting me say my piece, and for taking on this fight. It's a brave one for your organization to take up, and we're grateful to have you here fighting, against the ideologues at UNC.
Thanks for being a great guest.